All right, we are fixing to engage in something here that one of our American citizens tried to expose the things that was going on pertaining to cyberspace, and because he was working for the government at the time, he was soon to be punished severely for, I guess it was going to reach the level of espionage, of revealing things that he shouldn't have revealed to the American citizens. Well, now, a few years later, in which this individual that I'm talking about is Eric Snowden, which has went over to Russia to seek protection. Now, today we see what we're dealing with all these social media platforms that have simultaneously interfered in not only our privacy issues, but are now influencing vast majorities of societies all over the planet, that people are now beginning to start ringing bells and bringing it to other people's awareness. It's a red light, it's a red flag that is going off, that has been going off for quite some time. And now this young lady here who used to work for Facebook has made a conscious choice of choosing to go public to exploit the things that she knows are factual and that she can back up pertaining to Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook, and the things that they have been engaged in for the past few years since the digital era has come into existence. I, just the other day, was in a flea market, first Monday, down in Ripley, Mississippi. Walking around with my friends down there, engaging in some activities that I ordinarily don't engage in, towards looking around, seeing this, seeing that. And we had an opportunity of stopping and speaking to a police officer that was from, I believe, Puerto Rico. That was a retired police officer that used to be a police officer there in Ripley, Mississippi. As the exchange of conversations bared between three of us, I realized that this individual had an ego, that he was the most fairest-minded person towards being a police officer, towards not being biased in any form or fashion. And because he brought these things out so clearly, I had, as I usually am, so abrupt in sharing my point of view pertaining to this individual that felt this way about himself. My response was, the only way to truly have a true police officer who isn't biased one way or the other over thousands of different circumstances is to have a robocop, a computer cop that does not discern the difference between who you are, what you stand for, what you've achieved or not achieved, what nationality, what color, etc., etc. And he goes, how do you figure that? I go, because it's the human factor. And once I explained to him about the human factor, he still was dumb-minded, or he was still in denial about what he believed about himself towards he was the most upfront individual that ever was. And I explained to him, I go, in other words, you would pull over your mother, you would pull over your grandmother, you would pull over your father, you would pull over your brother, you would pull over the people that you love, going to issue them out a citation, even at the expense of them losing their liberty over. You would be willing to do that? Oh yeah, I'd be willing to do that. I go, I have trouble believing that. I go, there's a reason why that the medical industry, by and large, has made it a known fact that they do not want doctors, male or female, working on husbands or wives, mothers or fathers, brothers or sisters, anybody that's associated that close to them. Just like it's a known fact that if you're called to work in a jury pertaining to a trial, that if there is consequences involving who you are because of the relationship that you're having or have had with the individual that's in court, they immediately disqualify you. Just like a doctor or a nurse, you're disqualified. And another doctor or another nurse, because the human factor always comes in play to the point that that individual could possibly make a mistake, do something that he or she wouldn't naturally do if it was under different circumstances. His reply was, well, you have a right to believe whatever that you believe, and I have a right to believe whatever I believe, and I don't have to believe what you believe. I go, that's true. I go, you can deny the facts all you want, but the bottom line is that we have human factors that you cannot ignore, regardless whether you're a police officer or you're a doctor or you're in the middle of a hearing or a trial pertaining to working as the juror. We have human factors that we have to examine very closely, and there's a reason why that these things that I'm talking about are frowned upon pertaining to the human factor. Now, this leads me to what's going on here. The human factor pertaining to these social media platforms are out there in people's faces. People walking around with these devices now in their hands. Some of them can't even take it out of their hand long enough to walk down the road or drive an automobile. They still have to maintain this device in this computer age that we're living in. So you can't tell me that these social media platforms cannot be influential one way or the other in the human factor sense, because they can. What this lady is fixing to bring out is that in which what Facebook has been involved in, and they knowingly knew what they was doing intentionally, and they still done it anyway because it helped the reviews. It brought up their ratings. And because it brought up their ratings, people would have a tendency to look more at the commercial base, those who was marketing a certain item, regardless whether it was cereal, clothes, or diapers, or dog food, that they would have more of a sense of locking in because of the factors, the human factors, that this woman is fixing to elaborate on. So please listen to this, if you don't mind, because we're living in a digital era today that we didn't live in 20 plus years ago. We didn't live in that era. Today we're living in that era. We must pay attention to the things that are not only influencing us, but influencing our children and our children's children, if we're going to be a safe and secure society thriving into the future for the betterment of the will of all of us. Please listen.
That privacy protections or changes to Section 230 alone will be sufficient. While important, these will not get to the core of the issue, which is that no one truly understands the destructive choices made by Facebook except Facebook. We can afford nothing less than full transparency. As long as Facebook is operating in the shadows, hiding its research from public scrutiny, it is unaccountable. Until the incentives change, Facebook will not change. Left alone, Facebook will continue to make choices that go against the common good, our common good. When we realized big tobacco was hiding the harms it caused, the government took action. When we figured out cars were safer with seatbelts, the government took action. And when our government learned that opioids were taking lives, the government took action. I implore you to do the same here. Today, Facebook shapes our perception of the world by choosing the information we see. Even those who don't use Facebook are impacted by the majority who do. A company with such frightening influence over so many people, over their deepest thoughts, feelings, and behavior, needs real oversight. But Facebook's closed design means it has no real oversight. Only Facebook knows how it personalizes your feed for you. At other large tech companies like Google, any independent researcher can download from the internet the company's search results and write papers about what they find. And they do. But Facebook hides behind walls that keeps researchers and regulators from understanding the true dynamics of their system. Facebook will tell you privacy means they can't give you data. This is not true. When tobacco companies claimed that filtered cigarettes were safer for consumers, scientists could independently invalidate these marketing messages and confirm that, in fact, they posed a greater threat to human health. The public cannot do the same with Facebook. We are given no other option than to take their marketing messages on blind faith. Not only does the company hide most of its own data, my disclosure has proved that when Facebook is directly asked questions as important as, how do you impact the health and safety of our children, they mislead and they choose to mislead and misdirect. Facebook has not earned our blind faith. This inability to see into Facebook's actual systems and confirm how they work is communicated and confirm that they work as communicated is like the Department of Transportation regulating cars by only watching them drive down the highway. Today, no regulator has a menu of solutions for how to fix Facebook because Facebook didn't want them to know enough about what's causing the problems. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been need for a whistleblower. How is the public supposed to assess if Facebook is resolving conflicts of interest in a way that is aligned with the public good if the public has no visibility into how Facebook operates? This must change. Facebook wants you to believe that the problems we're talking about are unsolvable. They want you to believe in false choices. They want you to believe that you must choose between a Facebook full of divisive and extreme content or losing one of the most important values our country was founded upon, free speech. That you must choose between public oversight of Facebook's choices and your personal privacy. That to be able to share fun photos of your kids with old friends, you must also be inundated with anger-driven virality. They want you to believe that this is just part of the deal. I am here today to tell you that's not true. These problems are solvable. A safer, free speech respecting, more enjoyable social media is possible. But there's one thing that I hope everyone takes away from these disclosures. It is that Facebook can change, but is clearly not going to do so on its own. My fear is that without action, divisive and extremist behaviors we see today are only the beginning. What we saw in Myanmar and are now seeing in Ethiopia are only the opening chapters of a story so terrifying, no one wants to read the end of it. Congress can change the rules that Facebook plays by and stop the many harms it is now causing. We now know the truth about Facebook's destructive impact. I really appreciate the seriousness which the members of Congress and the Securities and Exchange Commission are approaching these issues, I came forward at great personal risk because I believe we still have time to act.
You know, whenever people like this step out into the eyes of the general public, and I'm gonna throw myself in the pile too. You never know what type of scrutiny that you're going to get from others that's going to demonize you, dehumanize you, that's going to ridicule you, that's going to judge you, that's going to put you on some sort of a platform that you don't deserve to be on, because society by and large compartmentalizes people and things because that's the way that we have been programmed, especially here in America. And sometimes you got nut jobs out there, people that's out of their minds, people that are evil, people that are messed up. You have people that take things out of proper perspective, and the next thing you know, they'll be falsely accusing somebody of being one way, knowing that they're not. If anything, they're just the opposite of that. It's similar towards what has occurred in my life, because whenever you do step out into the eyes of the general public, the public by and large is very, very demanding, and they can be very brutal and mean. It doesn't matter if it's pertaining to socialism, it doesn't matter if it's pertaining to politicalism, it doesn't matter if it's talking about pertaining to churchism or any other isms, that whenever you step out into the eyes of the general public, you are prone of being persecuted, demonized, dehumanized, and classified in a certain way by various individuals. So what this lady has just got through talking about is in fact true. Even politicians and preachers that step out into the eyes of the general public take large risks because of the stance that they are believing in and supporting. It's not so much with advertising agencies pertaining to, let's say, this cleaners over here is in competition of this cleaners over here, or this carpet manufacturer is in competition with this carpet maker over here, or this carpenter is in competition with this carpenter over here. But it can even lead to unfriendly feelings that can escalate into something else just because of that and that alone. Whenever you're talking about competition issues pertaining to putting some marketing strategies. Anytime you stand up and you give an account for what's going on, just like this woman here being a whistleblower pertaining to Facebook, she's taking a chance on not only her becoming a victim because of trying to do the right thing, but even her family. Once people find out who her father or who her mother or who her brothers or sisters or aunts or uncles are, they can make life hard on them because of her, because of what she's doing. So I commend this young lady in standing out and doing what that she's doing, because she feels like from the very soul and the heart of her inner being that this, for the betterment of the good, should be transparent to the eyes of the general public, so that we can all have an opportunity to decipher, debate, and maybe come to a better understanding about the past towards what has happened, including through our elections of so much controversy. And that may be because of the debates and looking and analyzing and deciphering, we can now come up with a better solution. That's the benefit of the free world that communist controlled countries does not have. You wonder how come the people over in the Middle East have never grown. They have never evolved. You wonder how come the people over in China and other communist, socialist, reform states and nations and countries haven't never evolved. Well, that's the reason why. It's because whenever you're in an environment that you're not allowed to talk or speak your piece, you automatically cut off the opportunities towards growth. And by knocking down or disqualifying the opportunities of growth, now all of a sudden you stifle that community, or you stifle that group of people that can no longer evolve. This is the benefits of our free, open, fair, not only elections, but our free, open, fair communities towards freedom of speech. And without this, I feel like society never would have evolved from the caveman days to discovering what fire was versus what the wheel was, that we never would have evolved to the point of where we are today. It's simply because we have those rights. And you have the right, just like I have the right, that I can either listen to this lady and decipher the things that she's talking about that make sense, or I can turn her off. Same way with myself. If you don't desire to want to hear any of the things that I'm putting out to the general public, that's fine. Cut it off. But in the meantime, I'm sitting here watching a slow motion train wreck that's not just happening with the American government and the American people, but I'm watching this happening all over the world, and I myself is kind of like her, with the same incentives towards wanting to help society, not hurt society, but help them. Now, obviously, you take somebody with a messed up mind, or somebody that worked directly or indirectly for Facebook, or is still working for Facebook, they're probably going to listen to this lady and have negative feelings about her and about what she's trying to achieve by bringing these things out in the forefront. Just like Eric Snowden. Whenever Eric Snowden done what Eric Snowden done, there was people that demonized him and criticized him based upon the fact that he was working for the United States government whenever he decided to become a whistleblower. I myself was a whistleblower pertaining to the events that happened in Mount Carmel, pertaining to tobacco firearms that led into the explosion of the Oklahoma bombing 2 years to the date with Timothy McVeigh and Nichols. Because I initiated my feelings, because I voiced my views, even to this day, I'm still being ridiculed, demonized, and dehumanized, though the facts line up in regards towards supporting my theories and my ideology about both occurrences. So once more, I commend this young lady for standing up and her doing what she's doing for the betterment of the good, for the will of the people, pertaining to the Facebook as well as other social media platforms that has these type of ill will motives, that does not care of the safety and the concerns for others, and can promote such negative atmosphere in a lot of young, undeveloped minds that it could cause harm, deformation, and even suicide by the individuals that have been hijacked into this atmosphere. Once more, we're dealing with a highly atmospheric, influential atmosphere pertaining to artificial intelligence that can lead and mislead individuals in such of a dramatic way to where we can't even begin to famine towards comparing it with any other thing other than it being a hoaxer or a manipulator or a what is the word that I'm looking for? A conniver, somebody that's out here trying to manipulate society in the way that they want them to be manipulated in. And that's not what our founders, the builders of this great country, pertaining to our Constitution, was based around. Just like the events that happened with the founder of the Windmill Ministries that began in 1989 out into the eyes of the general public. Yes, there was 9 tapes that went to the White House in 1988. But whenever I started going out into the eyes of the general public, Homeland Security, working through Madison County Police Department in Jackson, Tennessee, intervened into a ministry that they never should have intervened into. And they obtained, as far as I'm concerned, they stole. They literally hijacked a device from the ministry that not only they had no business in apprehending, but according to our Constitution, they should have stayed completely away from it, because I had said before, and I'll say again, it wouldn't have mattered if I had a locked up sword in a container that it took the police officers almost 30 minutes or better to getting into, or if it was a bugle, a trumpet, a cross, a purple cloth, or any of the other things that we consider sacred, including the Star of David, locked up into this container. Whenever the United States government intervened in the ministry, they was deliberately pouring gas upon to the situation towards making it even that much more worse. Now, getting back to the subject matter at hand, I don't know if what she's talking about consciously and willfully pertaining to the intent that Facebook is doing these things that she's accusing them of doing on the level that she's accusing them of. But let's just imagine, just for a split second, hypothetically speaking, that she was in fact correct about these individuals that are playing games on our youth and influencing people in negative ways just to bring up their personal ratings for material profits or gain. To me, this is my opinion, to me, that would be as bad as somebody that was going out here and raping somebody, murdering somebody, or stealing from somebody. Because if you're doing these things intentionally, knowing that you're misleading the public in the way that you're misleading them, especially based upon the incentives towards wanting to gain popularity for monetary purposes, I'm like her. I feel like the government should step in, just like the government stepped in of other things, regardless whether it was the Firestone tires or automobiles that didn't have safety devices on them that should have had, or the gun laws pertaining to making sure that people were being screened properly and not allowing for guns to be in the hands of the wrong people, or other safety-minded issues that is for the betterment of the good of we the people. I support and commend what this lady is doing.
But we must act now. I'm asking you, our elected representatives, to act. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Haugen. Thank you for taking that personal risk, and we will do anything and everything to protect and stop any retaliation against you and any legal action that the company may bring to bear, or anyone else. And we made that, I think, very clear in the course of these proceedings. I want to ask you about this idea of disclosure. You've talked about looking.
Well, I wish Congress would do the same for other people as well as her. Those who have been ridiculed, demonized, dehumanized, those who have been treated as a plague to society. I wish Congress would do the same for others as well as herself, because there are many people out there that has tried to be boisterous in the things that they believe in towards trying to, I'm going to use this terminology that young Bush used and Cheney, towards ridding the axis of evil from society. There's been many people that have tried to do that in different levels on different issues, and because they did, and because people either didn't agree or didn't understand what they was trying to achieve, they got blown out of the water. Not only did their lives become ruined, but ordinarily those who was associated with their lives got ruined. And I want to use Jesus as an illustration, because whenever Jesus was ridiculed to the point of death, and the people by and large went up against Christ in having him put to death because of the good deeds that he was trying to fulfill to society at the time that he was trying to fulfill them, do you not think that anybody that was associated with Jesus, regardless whether it was the 12 disciples or his mother or his aunts or his uncle or his stepfather or some of his brothers or distant kin, do you not think that they also received the same type of persecution in different ways because they was associated? Guilty by association is the way that society looks at it. Do you not think that they went through horror too? Sure they did. Sure they did. It was an evil and demonic society then, just like it's an evil and demonic society now. But because of the laws that we have established here within our land, here in America, we are not supposed to sit back and allow for this type of criminalization to an individual, towards trying to criminalize him or her, based upon that in which what they believe. And that's exactly what has happened here. You're not supposed to sit back. This is the point that I continue to make with the law enforcement agencies here in Weakley County in the Northwest Tennessee area. You're not supposed to sit back and allow for anti-Semitism to go on in an individual's life without stepping in and saying enough is enough. And that's exactly what the Weakley County authorities done. They sat back and they allowed for my family to be ridiculed, to be demonized, to be dehumanized. We become victimized because of the seeds that was planted years and years ago of the fish story that was this big, and then it got this big, and then next thing you know it turned into a whale, towards individuals that was dead set that they was going to make not only my life miserable, but my brother's life miserable too, to the point that they drove him off into an early grave at the age of 51. It was not any fault of my own doing towards me coming back here in 2014 after my brother and I had solely discussed it over the telephone several different times. It was not my fault that I had the sole desire of coming back into the area, of living on the homestead in which my grandmother and grandfather had purchased in along about 1937 after the 1929 Depression. It was not my fault that I wanted to come back to this neighborhood and literally try to help people in opening up their eyes pertaining to military issues as well as biblical Bible issues. It was not my fault, nor was it my brother's fault. But they drove me off into a bad state of health, in which today I'm trying to recover from. that began up in Cadiz, Kentucky, Christian County, pertaining to a Judge Woodall. It began in extreme of the other two events with the federal judge in Paducah, Kentucky, and another event whenever they decided that they was going to try to penalize me or punish me because I had warned them or foretold them that there was going to be electrical disturbances to come. But it was not my fault that I was trying to better humanity rather than hurt humanity. And it wasn't until 20 years into the lifespan of the ministry was whenever I decided, being led by the Holy Spirit, of going up into LBL and using the only proper tool that I knew to use, which was using God Almighty to fight my battles for me towards planting a curse upon to this ground. And whenever I say this ground, I'm not talking about 291 Thompson Road. I'm talking about the ground up in Kentucky and the ground amongst all the federal institutions that was part of this deception, part of this resistance movement that began basically in 1988, whenever various individuals in the White House thought that they was going to be able to ruin or destroy the very individual that's talking to you right now. And I pray to God that that is not what happens to this individual or all the other individuals out there who are trying to better society rather than harm and hurt them. You know, just the other day, I was flipping some of my pictures through a group of people up in Bruton Branch, Pickwick, Tennessee, around a bunch of people that was either from, they was basically from the South America. I'm gonna use that as a fill-in. I don't want to diversify their countries where they was actually from in South America, but they was from South America, and there were several of them. I guess there was 8 or 9, 10 of them. Some of them males, some of them females. And I showed a couple of the people the picture whenever I went on my Indian crusade there at the last in 2009, and I painted up my face, and I went in front of the courts there in Benton, Kentucky, and sat in front of the judge there in front of Benton, Kentucky, during which time that I had this makeup on. And the first thing that she was doing, one of the girls that was in this bunch the other day, she was like trying to figure out why would I have done that. And she'd mention this and I'd say no. And she'd mention this, I'd say no. It was kind of like truth or dare, you know. And finally she said, I get it. You was at a Kiss concert and you wanted to blend in. And I kind of looked at her and I said, well, you know what? You're the closest one that's come close to it yet towards trying to identify the reason why that I painted my face. Half of it was war torn and the other half was normal. I said, you're the only one that has come close to identifying, though you missed the mark a little bit, towards the reason why that I had my face painted the way that I had it painted. It wasn't over no Kiss concert. I've never been to a Kiss concert, and as far as I know, I've really never been a Kiss fan towards agreeing with their methods and liking their music. I guess to some degree, some of their music has grown on me throughout the years because they've been so predominant in society, like a lot of different music artists out there. And I guess, you know, from a very, very imaginary state of mind, I guess their color theme and their costumes and the way that they dressed up on stage, it brought a lot of attention to the subject matter of what that they was trying to do towards entertaining their viewing audience. And I guess in that sense, they accomplished what they wanted to accomplish. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's all done in innocence. There's nothing wrong with that. Once more, we live in America. But I'm just reflecting upon my personal testimony and others such as myself that have tried to do the right thing in the eyes of the betterment of the good for society, and we have been punished, penalized, dehumanized, demonized for doing so, which really speaks volumes about the society that we're living in today, that rather, just as Jesus taught, for mankind, our humanity, loves darkness more so than they love light. And it's kind of touching off or spawning off upon the interest matter, the subject matter of what she's talking about, that Mark Zuckerberg, that discovered these matters pertaining to how that people was more attracted to negativity than they was something positive, that those was the things that they thrived upon because those was the areas that was going to have the higher ratings. Well, if you know anything at all about the Bible, bad news carries much quicker than good news, based upon the teachings of Christ that said humanity loves darkness more so than they love light. And if you are a child of light, and if you are bringing forth light, or trying to help humanity in a lighted type fashion, you're going to be criticized. You're going to be looked down upon. People are going to make fun of you, and people are going to hate you. You're going to create haters. Just the mere pure fact that you have been willing to make a stand, and you're standing for the things of good versus the things of evil. Because you're standing for good, you're going to have some of the deepest, darkest, cruelest enemies in the world that are going to want you to die. And rather not it be right or wrong, because I believe it's wrong, but it speaks volumes about the 21st century of the Homo sapiens that are living upon this planet towards what that they desire. But yet now, whenever a flood comes, or a disease comes, or a heart attack comes, or a bad accident comes, or they get caught up in a bad dilemma such as suicide or gun violence, or somebody winds up going to jail for a long period of time, oh, will you please have pity on me? Will you please feel sorry for me? Even though 99% of the time, the stuff that they're going through was self-inflicting. You take an individual that smokes, that doesn't care about their health, drinks excessively. As that individual is dying, that's whenever something finally goes off in their brain, and they say, "My God, I'm killing myself. I'm going to have to quit smoking," and they quit. But then it's too late. But then from that moment on, they want everybody and their brother to feel sorry for them. Please feel sorry for me. I'm dying. I'm dying of lung cancer. I'm dying of this. My liver has been deteriorated because of all the alcohol that I've drinking. Please be sorry for me. Please help me. Whenever these self-inflicting wounds happen to people in a bad way, they've actually created their own Achilles heel in karma that is now coming back into their lives. But whenever somebody such as this lady, or somebody such as myself, that wants to help society versus hurting them, and we still get punished, we still get demoralized, we still get dehumanized, this is not self-inflicting. This is imposed upon to the enemy that is out to kill, steal, and destroy. I commend what she's doing and why she's doing it. I just pray to God that various people throughout our government officials, regardless whether they be in the highest rank of office pertaining to our Congress, are the lowest ranked pertaining to our judges and our sheriffs and our county and city mayors will be able to identify, I repeat, will be able to identify this queerness that has happened to society that has turned our morals upside down in comparison to the way that we used to look at things versus the way now that society looks at things. I hope and pray that we will not continue to go backwards or down the cliff, that we will eventually come out of this stupor that we're in right now. Not all of us, but a lot of us, some of us. And we will begin to reason in the right way, in reasoning with people that are trying to better society and not worsen it.
In effect, at a car going down the road, and we're going to have 5-minute rounds of questions, maybe a second round if you're willing to do it. We're here today to look under the hood, and that's what we need to do more. In August, Senator Blackburn and I wrote to Mark Zuckerberg, and we asked him pretty straightforward questions about how the company works and safeguards children and teens on Instagram. Facebook dodged, ducked, sidetracked, in effect misled us. So I'm going to ask you a few straightforward questions to break down some of what you have said, and if you can answer them yes or no, that would be great. Has Facebook's research, its own research, ever found that its platforms can have a negative effect on children and teens' mental health or well-being?
Many of Facebook's internal research reports indicate that Facebook has a serious negative harm on a significant portion of teenagers and younger and children.
And has Facebook ever offered features that it knew had a negative effect on children's and teens' mental health?
Facebook knows that its amplification algorithms, things like engagement-based ranking on Instagram, can lead children from very innocuous topics like healthy recipes. I think all of us could eat a little more healthy, all the way from just something innocent like healthy recipes to anorexia promoting content over a very short period of time.
And has Facebook ever found, again in its research, that kids show sign of addiction on Instagram?
Facebook has studied a pattern that they call problematic use, what we might more commonly call addiction. It has a very high bar for what it believes it is. It says you self-identify that you don't have control over your usage and that it is materially harming your health, your schoolwork, or your physical health. 5 to 6% of 14-year-olds have the self-awareness to admit both those questions. It is likely that far more than 5 to 6% of 14-year-olds are addicted to Instagram.
Last Thursday, my colleagues and I asked Ms. Davis, who was representing Facebook, about how the decision would be made whether to pause permanently Instagram for kids. And she said, quote, "There's no one person who makes a decision like that. We think about it that collaboratively." It's as though she couldn't mention Mark Zuckerberg's name. Isn't he the one who will be making this decision from your experience in the company?
Mark holds a very unique role in the tech industry in that he holds over 55% of all the voting shares for Facebook. There are no similarly powerful companies that are as unilaterally controlled. And in the end, the buck stops with Mark. There's no one currently holding Mark accountable but himself.
And Mark Zuckerberg, in effect, is the algorithm designer-in-chief, correct?
I received an MBA from Harvard, and they emphasized to us that we are responsible for the organizations that we build. Mark has built an organization that is very metrics-driven. It is intended to be flat. There is no unilateral responsibility. The metrics make the decision. Unfortunately, that itself is a decision. And in the end, if he is the CEO and the chairman of Facebook, he is responsible for those decisions.
The buck stops with him.
The buck stops with him.
And speaking of the buck stopping, you have said that Facebook should declare moral bankruptcy. I agree.
Yeah.
I think its actions and its failure to acknowledge its responsibility indicate moral bankruptcy.
Now, I want to weigh in on what they're talking about right here real quick, to my viewing base. There was a reason whenever I got first on social media platforms, having a smartphone, an Android phone, that after me engaging in Facebook for about a year, which was somewhere around 2015, leading up into 2016, there was a reason why that I deliberately got off of Facebook. I felt like that their actions was inappropriate. I felt like that what they was doing was wrong. And because of it, I got off of Facebook. It hasn't been only for the past, give or take, 2 or 3 months in which I've changed over phones and my Facebook is not active right now. It's still out there, but it's not as active as what it was. But it hasn't been until the past 2 or 3 months that I made a conscious decision. Well, I'm going to have, if I'm going to spread my message out beyond just some of the viewing bases that I've been touching upon, I'm going to have to get my message out there some way. So I consciously chose to use Facebook as one other platform to be able to put some of my material out there on. But it wasn't because it was the first choice. It was not because I felt at ease by doing it. It was only because, once more, I do not have the support of the community here in Northwest Tennessee. I do not have the support from the churches here in Northwest Tennessee. As far as I'm concerned, I do not have any support other than people that yik-yaks, that wants to judge me or criticize me or find boo-boos in some of the things that I either write about or talk about or make pictures of. As far as I'm concerned, I have not got that Joe Osteen support base or that congregation that most independent messengers have pertaining to the subject matter that they're putting out to the general public, even though the general public don't like the message coming from the messenger. So 30-something years later, the public, as well as the authorities here in Northwest Tennessee, are still holding my feet to the fire. As Judge Tommy Moore brought up, well, these people around here pursued you towards putting out a manifesto. Well, first of all, I'm not putting out a manifesto. And if some of these preachers and some of these people that go to church around here, if they want to declare the book of Revelations that come from John the Revelator as it being a manifesto, they need to take that up with John the Revelator one day whenever they wind up going to heaven, if they do make it to heaven, towards him writing the book of Revelations, because I didn't write the book of Revelations. I don't write manifestos. My message is still the message that Jesus Christ said, that if they won't receive you, if they won't accept you, to shake the dust off your feet and move on. To this day, they're still, as far as I'm concerned, biting the hand that is feeding them pertaining to their Heavenly Father. To this day, they're still in denial about wanting to support the founder of the Windmill Ministries. To this day, the Bible says, blessed is he who cometh in the name of the Lord. The Bible says that if you so much as give a cup of cold water to the least of these, that you shall not be denied your reward. They're not giving in this area. And I'm not going to create some sort of a scam or a scheme like a lot of these preachers have done. Oh, if you'll send me $10, I'll send you this prayer cloth and you'll receive a Cadillac and a brand new home. You'll just be blessed abundantly worldly wide. I'm not going to do that. Because if the people cannot base their decisions upon an honor system, the same honor system that our ancestors developed years and years ago, that if you'll shake my hand, I'll shake yours. If you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. If they cannot formally introduce themselves into the manifestation of being a supporter of the windmill ministries, I don't want them anyways. I don't want them around me. I don't want them influencing me, because odds are, if they are going to be around me, if they are going to influence me, they're going to try to influence me in a negative way or the wrong way. Now, the people that's doing the influencing, they want to be in control. Well, what do you got to say about that, Dennis? I got this to say about that. The Bible is very clear in the first 3 chapters of Revelations. See thou that no man, which means person, humanity in general, keep it in the right context. See thou that no man take thy crown. No man. And I've had people, regardless whether it was ex-wives, business consultants, preachers, or politicians, that as far as I'm concerned, they have purposely tried to steal my crown. I've got a crown laying up for me. Once I achieve the things that I'm supposed to achieve down here up onto the planet, providing that I achieve them, in which I'm still trying to achieve those achievements. But I've got a crown waiting up for me one day whenever I hear the words coming from my Heavenly Father, well done, thy good and faithful servant. Come and enter into the joy of the Lord, for you have been faithful over a few things, Juby. Now I'm going to make you ruler over many. That will be the day that I will thoroughly, pacifically receive my crown upon to my existence. Right now, the crown that I have received is not my crown. The angels that come out of heaven in 1988 on March the 22nd, while I was fishing over here in my grandfather's pond, that while I went to Kenton, Tennessee, was coming down and putting thorns up into my head, that was not my crown. That was the Lord's crown that He had placed in heaven, that was to be used at this particular certain time, according to not only Revelations, but according to Daniel, according to Isaiah, according to Ezekiel, and some of the other prophecies out of the Bible. This is not my crown that I now hold upon to my head, pertaining to the burdens that has fallen up into the lap of the founder of the Windmill Ministries, pertaining to not having any supporters here in America that I'm aware of. If they are, they're silent supporters. And to me, a silent supporter is basically no supporter. Oh, you may hold me up in prayer. You may support me, psychologically speaking. You may pray for me in the spirit world. But as far as you coming forth and you being on an honor system and saying, Jibby, we support you, man. We're in behind you. We believe in what you're telling us. What can we do to help you? As far as me seeing that type of a movement here in Northwest Tennessee, I have yet to see it since 1988, which makes, give or take, about what? 33, 34, going on 35 years, something like that. In addition to what happened in Kenton, Tennessee, pertaining to their authority figures, that to this day still haven't got an official apology from them, or an official apology from the Weakley County authorities. People like Tommy Moore, people like Mike Pence, people like Tommy Thomas, people, the district attorney, people, other in high places that control people's lives here in Weakley County. Have I gotten any type of apology from Land Between the Lakes? Have I gotten any apology from the federal judges in Paducah, Kentucky, pertaining to what went on in Land Between the Lakes? No. No, 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 on all these occasions. Have I gotten any type of apology from the authorities in Cadiz, Kentucky, pertaining to Judge Woodall that went all the way out to Oklahoma City, Oklahoma and picked me up because of 2 telephone calls that was non-threatening? No, I have not. Have I gotten any type of apology from any of the authority figures, or has the media changed any of their stories pertaining to how that they wanted to commercialize me in their media out in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma? Have I gotten any type of apology, even though the case was thrown out, and even though since then the very person that I supposedly threatened have become a good friends to, pertaining to U.S. Marshal Mr. Burns? No. No, 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 no. So, because this water, this cup of water, still hasn't come freely to me. And like I said, if I have to create some sort of a trap or a snare, or if I have to bamboozle my way in for these people of coming clean, to me, the apology isn't unique, and it isn't sincere to begin with. In other words, if I got to create some sort of an entrapment just to be able to get these people to acknowledge what they have done was wrong in regards to the founder of the Windmill Ministries, then you know what? I'll sit back and I'll watch this train wreck develop itself right in front of my very eyes, and I'll sit back and I'll watch this country be torn into little bitty pieces, just like it's being torn right now, pertaining to people just like this, that's influencing young minds towards driving them off into a state of suicide, driving them off into a state towards not eating properly, eating disorderlies, driving situations off, and to the point that our democracy is being tested whenever we have an open, fair election. I'll sit back and I'll feel sorry for them. But at the same time, I realize, you know what? I feel for you, but I can't reach you. And you know why I can't reach you? Because you're not willing to meet me halfway. If my hand is the only hand that's applying into or towards you, and your hand is not applying back, well, first of all, that's very unfair. That's unfair-minded. And secondly, why should I have to use twisting arm tactics just to get you to do what you're supposed to do pertaining to the honor system? I'm not going to. I'm going to be just like Jesus said, be wise as serpents, harmless as doves, and if they won't receive you, if they won't accept you, shake the dust off your feet and move on. And every time I move on, things get a little worse. Things get a little better. Every event, every year, gets a little more distressful, gets a little more harmful, gets a little more out of key. And until we see a spiritual movement, a revival, a revolution here in America and throughout the world, it's only going to get worse. And I tend to wonder if that's exactly what Tommy Moore and these officials and these so-called church communities around here, if that's not just exactly what they're wanting. They're wanting to see more people get raped and hurt and bankruptcies and people go to jail and more suicides and drug overdoses and gun massacres and country being $30 trillion in debt and walking away from a war after 20 years that the Taliban took back over in less than 11 days and spending $2 trillion. These obviously are the things that these people want. Because if they didn't, they would obviously be doing something different. And I don't see the results. I don't see them coming and knocking on Juby's door. Juby, what can we do to help you, man? We support you. We back you. How can we help you? I don't see it. Once more, white man speaketh with forked tongue. They talk about the atmosphere of peace, but I don't see nobody willing to make that commitment towards going there. And because of it, this country is being torn into shambles. Not only this country, but this planet is being torn into shambles. And I'm just wondering how far that this standoff that began in 1988, officially began in 1989, whenever I went out into the eyes of the general public. I'm just wondering how far that they're willing to go with this towards seeing all the suffering and the anguish and the pain, because I guarantee you what they're playing with is fire. What the Neal family over in Kenton, Tennessee is playing with is fire. What the officials over there is playing with in Kenton, Tennessee is fire. What the officials are playing with here in Weakley County, regardless whether it's Martin PD or it's Mr. Moore that's got the police academy over in Martin, Tennessee, that's in charge of the UTM or part of the UTM security base over there, as well as the Dresden authorities. What they're playing with is fire. They're not playing with me. I'm just a man. I'm just a messenger. It's who developed the message of who that they're playing with and what they're in denial about. And as I said, until I see that honor system come true circle, and it may be that these baby boomers that have created this atmosphere are all going to have to die out before the younger generation realizes that, wow, this is really serious, isn't it? Wow, this is really happening, isn't it? Oh, yeah, it's really happening. It's really serious. Before there's going to be a group of people that's going to acknowledge towards doing the right thing. Then again, I'm liable to be one of those prophets in the Bible that doesn't never achieve any true converts. And if that be the case, then so be it. Because I can lay my head down at night and I know where I stand with my Lord and my Savior. I know where I stand in telling the public about the truth. I know where I stand pertaining to giving God all the glory, honor, and praise through the Son, Jesus Christ. I know where I stand. And I don't have to stand in front of any man. I don't have to stand in front of Tommy Moore or Judge Pence or the prosecuting attorney that, as far as I'm concerned, is a bunch of hokey pokies. Not only with me, but with all these other people that's followed them and supported them throughout these years. Imagine this, a sheriff that has been sheriff for over 9 terms here in Weakley County, knowing that the country has turned as sour as what it has, is still standing on a podium being proud of himself, of the occurrences that's happening not only here in Weakley County, but the occurrences that's happening all over the countryside. And any other politician that's been in power for any more than 10 or more years. That cannot come clean. That will not come clean. That will not give any type of reverence of their wrongdoings towards how that they have set back and allowed for this thing to get out of hand. It's sickening. It's heartbreaking. It's sickening and heartbreaking at the same time towards watching how that my country is being torn apart this way. I pray for people every day. God, wake them up. Get them out of the bondages that they're in. help them come out of the blindness that Satan has obviously blinded them under. And like I said, it's like a stalemate. I still don't see no positive results. If anything, I'm still getting negative reviews. Just like this poor woman here. She'll end up getting negative reviews. Watch and see. There'll be a few of them that will appreciate what she's doing. But by and large, humanity, once more going back to the teachings of Christ, humanity loves darkness rather than light. So if their heart is pierced with darkness, they're actually going to despise her towards coming out and telling the truth about Facebook.
Occurring inside the company where Facebook has struggled for a long time to recruit and retain the number of employees it needs to tackle the large scope of projects that it has chosen to take on. Facebook is stuck in a cycle where it struggles to hire. That causes it to understaff projects, which causes scandals, which then makes it harder to hire. Part of why Facebook needs to come out and say, we did something wrong, we made some choices that we regret, is the only way we can move forward and heal Facebook is we first have to admit the truth. Like the way we'll have reconciliation and we can move forward is by first being honest and declaring moral bankruptcy.
Being honest and acknowledging that Facebook has caused and aggravated a lot of pain simply to make more money. And it has profited off spreading disinformation and misinformation and sowing hate. Facebook's answers to Facebook's destructive impact always seems to be more Facebook. We need more Facebook, which means more pain and more money for Facebook. Would you agree?
I don't think at any point Facebook set out to make a destructive platform. I think it is a challenge of that Facebook has set up an organization where the parts of the organization responsible for growing and expanding the organization are separate and not regularly cross-pollinated with the parts of the company that focus on the harms that the company is causing. And as a result, regularly, integrity actions, projects that were hard fought by the teams trying to keep us safe, are undone by new growth projects that counteract those same remedies. So I do think it's a thing of there are organizational problems that need oversight, and Facebook needs help in order to move forward to a more healthy place.
And whether it's teens bullied into suicidal thoughts or the genocide of ethnic minorities in Myanmar, or fanning the flames of division within our own country or in Europe, they are ultimately responsible for the immorality of the pain that's caused.
Facebook needs to take responsibility for the consequences of its choices. It needs to be willing to accept small trade-offs on profit. And I think just that act of being able to admit that it's a mixed bag is important. And I think that what we saw from Antigone last week is an example of the kind of behavior we need to support Facebook in growing out of, which is instead of just focusing on all the good they do, admit they have responsibilities to also remedy the harm.
But Mark Zuckerberg's new policy is no apologies, no admissions, no acknowledgement, nothing to see here. We're going to deflect it and go sailing. I turn to the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony. I want to stay with Ms. Davis and some of her comments because I had asked her last week about the underage users. And she had made the comment, I'm going to quote from her testimony, if we find an account of someone who's under 13, we remove them. In the last 3 months, we removed 600,000 accounts of under 13-year-olds, end quote. And I have to tell you, it seems to me that there's a problem if you have 600,000 accounts from children who ought not to be there in the first place. So what did Mark Zuckerberg know about Facebook's plans to bring kids on as new users and advertise to them?
There are reports within Facebook that show cohort analyses where they examine at what ages do people join Facebook and Instagram. And based on those cohort analyses, so Facebook likes to say children lie about their ages to get onto the platform. The reality is enough kids tell the truth that you can work backwards to figure out what are approximately the real ages of anyone who's on the platform. When Facebook does cohort analyses and looks back retrospectively, it discovers things like, up to 10 to 15% of even 10-year-olds in a given cohort may be on Facebook or Instagram.
Okay, so this is why Adam Mosseri, who's the CEO of Instagram, would have replied to Jojo Siwa when she said to him, "Oh, I've been on Instagram since I was 8." He said he didn't want to know that.
Yeah.
So it would be for this reason, correct?
A pattern of behavior that I saw at Facebook was that often problems were so understaffed that there was kind of an implicit discouragement from having better detection systems. So for example, I worked, my last team at Facebook was on the counter-espionage team within the threat intelligence org. And at any given time, our team could only handle a third of the cases that we knew about. We knew that if we built even a basic detector, we would likely have many more cases.
Okay, then let me ask you.
Sure.
Yeah, let me ask you this. So you look at the way that they have the data, but they're choosing to keep that data and advertise from it, right? You sell it to third parties. So what does Facebook do? You've got these 600,000 accounts that ought not to be on there.
Probably more.
And right. But then you delete those accounts. But what happens to that data? Does Facebook keep that data? Do they keep it until those children go to age 13? Since, as you're saying, they can work backward and figure out the true age of a user. So what do they do with it? Do they delete it? Do they store it? Do they keep it? How do they process that?
My understanding of Facebook's data retention policies, and I want to be really clear, I didn't work directly on that, is that when they delete an account, they delete all the data within, I believe, 90 days in compliance with GDPR. With regard to children underage on the platform, Facebook could do substantially more to detect more of those children, and they should have to publish for Congress those processes because there are lots of subtleties in those things, and they could be much more effective than probably what they're doing today.
Got it. Now, staying with this underage children, since this hearing is all about kids and about online privacy, I want you to tell me how Facebook is able to do market research on these children that are under age 13, because Mrs. Davis was really, she didn't deny this last week. So how are they doing this? Do they bring kids into focus groups with their parents? How do they get that permission? She said they got permission from parents. Is there a permission slip or a form that gets signed? And then how do they know which kids to target?
There's a bunch to unpack there. We'll start with maybe how did they recruit children for focus groups or recruit teenagers. Most tech companies have systems where they can analyze the data that is on their servers. So most of the focus groups I read or that I saw analysis of were around Messenger Kids, which has children on it. And those focus groups appear to be children interacting in person. Often, large tech companies use either sourcing agencies that will go and identify people who meet certain demographic criteria, or they will reach out directly based on data on the platform. So for example, in the case of Messenger Kids, maybe you would want to study a child that was an active user and one that was a less active user. You might reach out to some that came from each population.
And so these are children that are under age 13.
Yeah.
And they know it.
For some of these studies. And I assume they get permission, but I don't work on that.
Okay. Well, we're still waiting to get a copy of that parental consent form that would involve children. My time has expired, Mr. Chairman. I'll save my other questions for our second round if we're able to get those. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Senator Blackburn. Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much, Ms. Haugen, for shedding a light on how Facebook time and time again has put profit over people. When their own research found that more than 13% of teen girls say that Instagram made their thoughts of suicide worse, what did they do? They proposed Instagram for Kids, which has now been put on pause because of public pressure. When they found out that their algorithms are fostering polarization, misinformation, and hate, that they allowed 99% of their violent content to remain unchecked on their platform, including lead up to the January 6th insurrection. What did they do? They now, as we know, Mark Zuckerberg's going sailing and saying no apologies. I think the time has come for action, and I think you are the catalyst for that action. You have said privacy legislation is not enough. I completely agree with you, but I think you know we have not done anything to update our privacy laws in this country, our federal privacy laws. Nothing, zilch, in any major way. Why? Because there are lobbyists around every single corner of this building that have been hired by the tech industry. We have done nothing when it comes to making the algorithms more transparent, allowing for the university research that you referred to. Why? Because Facebook and the other tech companies are throwing a bunch of money around this town and people are listening to them. We have done nothing significantly past, although we are on a bipartisan basis working in the antitrust subcommittee to get something done on consolidation, which you understand allows the dominant platforms to control all this, like the bullies in the neighborhood, buy out the companies that maybe could have competed with them and added the bells and whistles. So the time for action is now. So I'll start with something that I asked Facebook's head of safety when she testified before us last week. I asked her how they estimate the lifetime value of a user for kids who start using their products before they turn 13. She evaded the question and said, that's not the way we think about it. Is that right? Or is it your experience that Facebook estimates and puts a value on how much money they get from users in general? I'll get to kids in a second. Is that a motivating force for them?
Based on what I saw in terms of allocation of integrity spending, so one of the things disclosed in the Wall Street Journal was that I believe it's like 87% of all the misinformation spending is spent on English, but only about like 9% of the users are English speakers. It seems that Facebook invests more in users who make them more money, even though the danger may not be evenly distributed based on profitability.
Does it make sense that having a younger person get hooked on social media at a young age makes them more profitable over the long term as they have a life ahead of them?
Facebook's internal documents talk about the importance of getting younger users, for example, tweens, onto Instagram, like Instagram Kids, because they need to have, they know that children bring their parents online and things like that. And so they understand the value of younger users for the long-term success of Facebook.
Facebook reported advertising revenue to be $51.58 per user last quarter in the US and Canada. When I asked Ms. Davis how much of that came from Instagram users under 18, she wouldn't say. Do you think that teens are profitable for their company?
I would assume so, based on advertising for things like television. You get much substantially higher advertising rates for customers who don't yet have preferences or habits. And so I'm sure they are some of the more profitable users on Facebook, but I do not work directly on that.
Another major issue that's come out of this, eating disorders. Studies have found that eating disorders actually have the highest mortality rate of any mental illness for women. And I led a bill on this with Senators Capito and Baldwin that we passed into law. And I'm concerned that this algorithms that they have pushes outrageous content, promoting anorexia and the like. I know it's personal to you. Do you think that their algorithms push some of this content to young girls?
Facebook knows that the engagement-based ranking, the way that they pick the content in Instagram for young users, for all users, amplifies preferences. And they have done something called a proactive incident response, where they take things that they've heard, for example, like, can you be led by the algorithms to anorexia content? And they have literally recreated that experiment themselves and confirmed, yes, this happens to people. So Facebook knows that they are leading young users to anorexia content.
Do you think they are deliberately designing their product to be addictive beyond even that content?
Facebook has a long history of having a successful and very effective growth division where they take little tiny tweaks and they constantly are trying to optimize it to grow. Those kinds of stickiness could be construed as things that facilitate addiction.
Right. Last thing I'll ask is we've seen this same kind of content in the political world. You brought up other countries and what's been happening there. On 60 Minutes, you said that Facebook implemented safeguards to reduce misinformation ahead of the 2020 election, but turned off those safeguards right after the election. And you know that the insurrection occurred January 6th. Do you think that Facebook turned off the safeguards because they were costing the company money, because it was reducing profits?
Facebook has been emphasizing a false choice. They've said the safeguards that were in place before the election implicated free speech. The choices that were happening on the platform were really about how reactive and twitchy was the platform, right? Like how viral was the platform. And Facebook changed those safety defaults in the run-up to the election because they knew they were dangerous. And because they wanted that growth back, they wanted the acceleration of the platform back after the election, they returned to their original defaults. And the fact that they had to break the glass on January 6th and turn them back on, I think that's deeply problematic.
Agree. Thank you very much for your bravery in coming forward.
Senator Thune.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member Blackburn. I've been arguing for some time that it is time for Congress to act, and I think the question is always what is the correct way to do it, the right way to do it, consistent with our First Amendment right to free speech.
Totally.
This committee doesn't have jurisdiction over the antitrust issue. That's the Judiciary Committee, and I'm not averse to looking at the monopolistic nature of Facebook, honestly. I think that's a real issue that needs to be examined and perhaps addressed as well. But at least under this committee's jurisdiction, there are a couple of things I think we can do. And I have a piece of legislation, and Senators Blackburn and Blumenthal are both co-sponsors, called the Filter Bubble Transparency Act. And essentially what it would do is give users the options to engage with social media platforms without being manipulated by these secret formulas that essentially dictate the content that you see when you open up an app or log on to a website. We also, I think, need to hold big tech accountable by reforming Section 230. And one of the best opportunities, I think, to do that, at least in a bipartisan way, is the Platform Accountability and Consumer Transparency, or the PACT Act, and that's legislation that I've co-sponsored with Senator Schatz, which, in addition to stripping Section 230 protections for content that a court determines to be illegal, the PACT Act would also increase transparency and due process for users around the content moderation process. And importantly, in the context we're talking about today with this hearing, with a major big tech whistleblower, the PACT Act would explore the viability of a federal program for big tech employees to blow the whistle on wrongdoing inside the companies where they work. In my view, we should encourage employees in the tech sector like you to speak up about questionable practices of big tech companies, so we can, among other things, ensure that Americans are fully aware of how social media platforms are using artificial intelligence and opaque algorithms to keep them hooked on the platform. So let me, Ms. Haugen, just ask you, we've learned from the information that you provided that Facebook conducts what's called engagement-based ranking, which you've described as very dangerous. Could you talk more about why engagement-based ranking is dangerous, and do you think Congress should seek to pass legislation like the Filter Bubble Transparency Act that would give users the ability to avoid engagement-based ranking altogether?
Facebook is going to say, you don't want to give up engagement-based ranking. You're not going to like Facebook as much if we're not picking out the content for you. That's just not true. There are a lot of, Facebook likes to present things as false choices, like you have to choose between having lots of spam. Like let's say, imagine we ordered our feeds by time, like on iMessage or on, there are other forms of social media that are chronologically based. They're gonna say, you're gonna get spam, you're spammed by your feed. The reality is that the experiences have a lot of permutations. There are ways that we can make those experiences where computers don't regulate what we see. We together socially regulate what we see. But they don't want us to have that conversation because Facebook knows that when they pick out the content that we focus on using computers, we spend more time on their platform, they make more money. The dangers of engagement-based ranking are that Facebook knows that content that elicits an extreme reaction from you is more likely to get a click, a comment, or reshare. And it's interesting because those clicks and comments and reshares aren't even necessarily for your benefit. It's because they know that other people will produce more content if they get the likes and comments and reshares. They prioritize content in your feed so that you will give little hits of dopamine to your friends so they will create more content. And they have run experiments on people, producer-side experiments, where they have confirmed this.
So
Yeah.
you and your part of the information you provided the Wall Street Journal, it's been found that Facebook altered its algorithm in an attempt to boost these meaningful social interactions, or MSI. But rather than strengthening bonds between family and friends on the platform, the algorithm instead rewarded more outrage and sensationalism. And I think Facebook would say that its algorithms are used to connect individuals with other friends and family that are largely positive. Do you believe that Facebook's algorithms make its platform a better place for most users, and should consumers have the option to use Facebook and Instagram without being manipulated by algorithms designed to keep them engaged on that platform?
I want to weigh in right now what they're talking about. And I'm going to use Walmart, which may sound unfair, but once more, Walmart is your big, heavy, hard retailer out there that basically plays, I ain't gonna say similar games, but they play games on the same marketing skills, that whenever they have something that they realize that they're not going to be able to push, and they have obviously made the wrong decision towards investing in whatever that they have invested in, they immediately use different techniques. First technique is it's on sale, 20% off. They'll put it over in the clearance items. Second thing, if they still can't push that item, they'll put it right in the doorway to where whenever you, as soon as you walk in, if you're not stumbling over it, you have a tendency of either looking to one side or the other, and as you do, you see all these products that's 50% off, 75% off, and it's like, wow, let's go ahead and get this because it's 75% off. I'm going to save $15 on this item. Thing about it is, you really didn't want the item. You really didn't need the item. You really have no use for the item. The only reason why that you have targeted the item is because you feel like that you're going to save money. And because you're saving money, you go ahead and purchase the item that really and truly you never would have purchased to begin with, especially if it was on the shelf at regular price. So these games that people uses towards strategy skills in marketing stuff, regardless whether you're doing it on a platform or you're doing it on the front end of an item that you realize that product isn't moving the way that it should. This isn't just being conducted on artificial intelligence towards people playing with our emotions and playing with our opportunities towards buying this and buying that and doing this and doing that. This has been going on now for quite some times. People prey on their market by using market skills. And that's exactly what they'll tell you. Well, that is our market skill tactic that we use to go ahead and push that product out the door, because if we didn't lower the price, odds are we never would have got rid of it and we would have had to throw it in the dumpster. They basically are doing the same thing right here, on a social media artificial intelligence platform, by targeting various people, by once more raising those ratings, people will look at those commercials. It will touch off on various, they're calling it algorithms, towards people paying attention to what's going on. And because of it, it is putting profit above people. Well, hasn't that been going on now for quite some time here in America? I mean, let's just look at how that a car salesman or somebody in the real estate industry are trying to sell a couple something, knowing that their margin is so close that really and truly what they're buying, they shouldn't be buying it because it's going to jeopardize their freedom. It's going to jeopardize their elbow room in being able to live out a decent life, not counting the fact that if there's an emergency, they're basically screwed. And some of these people are living so close of a margin that if a flat tire, a blowed out tire, a $200 tire, can actually cause them to upset the apple cart. These are people that are preying on people's emotions, they're preying on people's finances, they're preying on opportunities that should not be allowed to be done, not only in America but worldwide. Because once you do an assessment on somebody, well, you're making this much a week, you're making this much a week, at the end of the month, you got this amount, you've already got 5 bills that add up to this. Yeah, you can make the payment, but you're not going to have no other extra for toilet paper or underwear, or you're not going to be able to fulfill any more of your duties if you have a blowed out tire or a blowed up motor on a vehicle. Not counting if you're engaged in a major accident or you have a health issue problem. So these types of piranhas that prey on people is not something that just developed overnight. It just so happens now it's affecting so many people in so many different ways, especially the youth, to where now the government is starting to look at it and frown with raised eyebrows towards saying, what can we do to possibly prevent or eliminate or stop or slow down some of these activities? This should have been addressed, I'm going to say probably 7-8 years ago. But that shows you how far behind that our American government is whenever it comes to being concerned about its own citizenship here, not only in America, but throughout the world. And it's really sad. It's really, really sad because you have people out there that are nothing more than snake oil salesmen, trying to talk you in of buying something or doing something or participating in something that ordinarily you never would have done if they didn't move into your life at a certain particular time with a certain particular product towards trying to panhandle off of you and getting rich schemes. It's all based around greed. Greed that has spoilt, contaminated, corrupted people's lives to no end. That now I'm sitting back watching people being destroyed on a not day to day, not hour per hour, but people being destroyed on a minute by minute basis.
I strongly believe, I've spent most of my career working on systems like engagement-based ranking. When I come to you and say these things, I'm basically damning 10 years of my own work, right? Engagement-based ranking, Facebook says we can do it safely because we have AI. The artificial intelligence will find the bad content that we know our engagement-based ranking is promoting. They've written blog posts on how they know engagement-based ranking is dangerous, but the AI will save us. Facebook's own research says they cannot adequately identify dangerous content, and as a result, those dangerous algorithms that they admit are picking up the extreme sentiments, the division. They can't protect us from the harms that they know exist in their own system. And so I don't think it's just a question of saying, should people have the option of choosing to not be manipulated by their algorithms? I think if we had appropriate oversight, or if we reformed 230 to make Facebook responsible for the consequences of their intentional ranking decisions, I think they would get rid of engagement-based ranking, because it is causing teenagers to be exposed to more anorexia content. It is pulling families apart. And in places like Ethiopia, it's literally fanning ethnic violence. I encourage reform of these platforms, not picking and choosing individual ideas, but instead making the platforms themselves safer, less twitchy, less reactive, less viral, because that's how we scalably solve these problems.
Thank you. Ms. Chair, I would simply say let's get to work. So we got some things we can do here. Thanks.
I agree. Thank you. Senator Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member. Thank you for your courage in coming forward. Was there a particular moment when you came to the conclusion that reform from the inside was impossible and that you decided to be a whistleblower?
There was a long series of moments where I became aware that Facebook conflicts of interest between its own profits and the common good, public safety, that Facebook consistently chose to prioritize its profits. I think the moment at which I realized we needed to get help from the outside, that the only way these problems would be solved is by solving them together, not solving them alone, was when civic integrity was dissolved following the 2020 election. It really felt like a betrayal of the promises that Facebook had made to people who had sacrificed a great deal to keep the election safe, by basically dissolving our community and integrating it in just other parts of the company.
And when I know their response is that they've sort of distributed the duties,
Yeah.
that's an excuse, right?
I cannot see into the hearts of other men, and I don't know what
Well,
they're.
let me say it this way. It won't work, right?
And I can tell you that when I left the company, so the people who I worked with were disproportionately, maybe 75% of my pod of 7 people. Those are product managers, program managers. Most of them had come from civic integrity. All of us left the inauthentic behavior pod, either for other parts of the company or the company entirely over the same 6-week period of time. So 6 months after the reorganization, we had clearly lost faith that those changes were coming.
You said in your opening statement that they know how to make Facebook and Instagram safer. So, thought experiment. You are now the chief executive officer and chairman of the company. What changes would you immediately institute?
I would immediately establish a policy of how to share information and research from inside the company with appropriate oversight bodies like Congress. I would give proposed legislation to Congress saying, here's what an effective oversight agency would look like. I would actively engage with academics to make sure that people who are confirming are Facebook's marketing message is true have the information they need to confirm these things. And I would immediately implement the, quote, soft interventions that were identified to protect the 2020 election. So that's things like requiring someone to click on a link before resharing it, because other companies like Twitter have found that significantly reduces misinformation. No one is censored by being forced to click on a link before resharing it.
Thank you. I want to pivot back to Instagram's targeting of kids. We all know that they announced a pause, but that reminds me of what they announced when they were going to issue a digital currency. And they got beat up by the US Senate Banking Committee, and they said, never mind. And now they're coming back around, hoping that nobody notices that they are going to try to issue a currency. Now, let's set aside for the moment the sort of the business model, which appears to be gobble up everything, do everything. That's the growth strategy. Do you believe that they're actually going to discontinue Instagram Kids, or are they just waiting for the dust to settle?
I would be sincerely surprised if they do not continue working on Instagram Kids, and I would be amazed if a year from now we don't have this conversation again.
Why?
Facebook understands that if they want to continue to grow, they have to find new users. They have to make sure that the next generation is just as engaged with Instagram as the current one. And the way they'll do that is by making sure that children establish habits before they have good self-regulation,
By hooking kids.
by hooking kids. I would like to emphasize one of the documents that we sent in on problematic use examined the rates of problematic use by age, and that peaked with 14-year-olds. It's just like cigarettes. Teenagers don't have good self-regulation. They say explicitly, I feel bad when I use Instagram and yet I can't stop. We need to protect the kids.
Just my final question, I have a long list of misstatements, misdirections, and outright lies from the company. I don't have the time to read them, but you're as intimate with all of these deceptions as I am, so I will just jump to the end. If you were a member of this panel, would you believe what Facebook is saying?
I would not believe, Facebook has not earned our right to just have blind trust in them. Trust is, last week, one of the most beautiful things that I heard on the committee was trust is earned, and Facebook has not earned our trust.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Schatz. Senator Moran, and then we've been joined by the chair, Senator Cantwell. She'll be next. We're going to break at about 11:30, if that's okay, because we have a vote.
Okay.
And then we'll reconvene.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. The conversation so far reminds me that you and I ought to resolve our differences and introduce legislation. So as Senator Thune said, let's go to work.
Our differences are very minor, or they seem very minor in the face of the revelations that we've now seen. So I'm hoping we can move forward, Senator Moran.
I share that view, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Thank you very much for your testimony. What examples do you know? We've talked about particularly children, teenage girls in specifically, but what other examples do you know about where Facebook or Instagram knew its decisions would be harmful to its users, but still proceeded with the plan and executed those harmful behavior?
Facebook's internal research is aware that there are a variety of problems facing children on Instagram that are, they know that severe harm is happening to children. For example, in the case of bullying, Facebook knows that Instagram dramatically changes the experience of high school. So when we were in high school, when I was in high school, most kids
You looked at me and changed your wording.
Sorry. When I was in high school, most kids have positive home lives. Like, it doesn't matter how bad it is at school, kids can go home and reset for 16 hours. Kids who are bullied on Instagram, the bullying follows them home. It follows them into their bedrooms. The last thing they see before they go to bed at night is someone being cruel to them, or the first thing they see in the morning is someone being cruel to them. Kids are learning that their own friends, like people who care about them, are cruel to them. Like, think about how that's going to impact their domestic relationships when they become 20-somethings or 30-somethings, to believe that people who care about you are mean to you. Facebook knows that parents today, because they didn't experience these things, they never experienced this addictive experience with a piece of technology, they give their children bad advice. They say things like, why don't you just stop using it? And so that Facebook's own research is aware that children express feelings of loneliness and struggling with these things because they can't even get support from their own parents. I don't understand how Facebook can know all these things and not escalate it to someone like Congress for help and support in navigating these problems.
Let me ask the question in a broader way. Besides teenagers or besides girls or besides youth, are there other practices at Facebook or Instagram that are known to be harmful but yet are pursued?
Facebook is aware that choices it made in establishing like meaningful social interactions, so engagement-based ranking that didn't care if you bullied someone or committed hate speech in the comments, that was meaningful. They know that change directly changed publishers' behavior, that companies like BuzzFeed wrote in and said, the content is most successful on our platform is some of the content we're most ashamed of. You have a problem with your ranking, and they did nothing. They know that politicians are being forced to take positions they know their own constituents don't like or approve of because those are the ones that get distributed on Facebook. That's a huge, huge negative impact. Facebook also knows that they have admitted in public that engagement-based raping is dangerous without integrity and security systems, but then not rolled out those integrity and security systems to most of the languages in the world. And that's what causing things like ethnic violence in Ethiopia.
Thank you for your answer. What is the magnitude of Facebook's revenues or profits that come from the sale of user data?
Oh, I'm sorry, I've never worked on that. I'm not aware.
Thank you. What regulations or legal actions by Congress or by administrative action do you think would have the most consequence or would be feared most by Facebook, Instagram, or allied companies?
I strongly encourage reforming Section 230 to exempt decisions about algorithms, right? So modifying 230 around content, I think has it's very complicated because user-generated content is something that companies have less control over. They have 100% control over their algorithms. And Facebook should not get a free pass on choices it makes to prioritize growth and virality and reactiveness over public safety. They shouldn't get a free pass on that because they're paying for their profits right now with our safety. So I strongly encourage reform of 230 in that way. I also believe there needs to be a dedicated oversight body because right now the only people in the world who are trained to analyze these experiments, to understand what's happening inside of Facebook, are people who grew up inside of Facebook or Pinterest or another social media company. And there needs to be a regulatory home where someone like me could do a tour of duty after working at a place like this and have a place to work on things like regulation, to bring that information out to the oversight boards that have the right to do oversight.
A regulatory agency within the federal government.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
Senator Cantwell.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Senator
Chairman.
Moran.
Thank you for holding this hearing, and I think my colleagues have brought up a lot of important issues, and so I think I just want to continue on that vein. First of all, the Privacy Act that I introduced along with several of my colleagues actually does have FTC oversight of algorithm transparency. In some instances, I'd hope you take a look at that and tell us what other areas you think we should add to that level of transparency. But clearly that's the issue at hand here, I think, in your coming forward. So thank you again for your willingness to do that. The documentation that you say now exists is the level of transparency about what's going on that people haven't been able to see. And so your information that you say has gone up to the highest levels at Facebook is that they purposely knew that their algorithms were continuing to have misinformation and hate information, and that when presented with information about this terminology, downstream MSI, meaningful social information, knowing that it was this choice, you could continue this wrong-headed information, hate information about the Rohingya, or you could continue to get higher click-through rates. And I know you said you don't know about profits, but I'm pretty sure you know that on a page. Yeah. If you click through that next page, I'm pretty sure there's a lot more ad revenue than if you didn't click through. So you're saying that documents exist that at the highest level at Facebook, you had information discussing these two choices and that people chose, even though they knew that it was misinformation and hurtful and maybe even causing people lives, they continued to choose profit.
We have submitted documents to Congress outlining Mark Zuckerberg was directly presented with a list of, quote, soft interventions. So a hard intervention is like taking a piece of content off Facebook, taking a user off Facebook. Soft interventions are about making slightly different choices to make the platform less viral, less twitchy. Mark was presented with these options and chose to not remove downstream MSI in April of 2020, even though he, in even just isolated in at-risk countries, that's countries at risk of violence, if it had any impact on the overall MSI metric. So he chose—
Which in translation means less money.
Yeah, he said—
Right? Was there another reason given why they would do it other than they thought it would really affect their numbers?
I don't know for certain. Like Jeff Horowitz, the reporter for the Wall Street Journal, and I struggled with this. We sat there and read these minutes and we're like, how is this possible? Like, we've just read 100 pages on how downstream MSI expands hate speech, misinformation, violence inciting content, graphic violent content. Why wouldn't you get rid of this? And the best theory that we've come up with, and I want to emphasize this is just our interpretation on it, is people's bonuses are tied to MSI, right? Like people stay or leave the company based on what they get paid. And like, if you hurt MSI, a bunch of people weren't going to get their bonuses.
So you're saying that this practice even still continues today? Like, we're still in this environment? I'm personally
Yeah.
very frustrated by this because we presented information to Facebook from one of my own constituents in 2018 talking about this issue with the Rohingya, pleading with the company.
Yeah.
We pleaded with the company, and they continue to not address this issue. Now, you're pointing out that these same algorithms are being used, and they know darn well in Ethiopia that it's causing and inciting violence. And again, they are still today choosing profit over taking this information down. Is that correct?
When rioting began in the United States in the summer of last year, they turned off downstream MSI only for when they detected content was health content, which is probably COVID, and civic content. But Facebook's own algorithms are bad at finding this content. It's still in the raw form for 80, 90% of even that sensitive content. In countries where they don't have integrity systems in the local language, and in the case of Ethiopia, there are 100 million people in Ethiopia in 6 languages. Facebook only supports 2 of those languages for integrity systems. This strategy of focusing on language-specific, content-specific systems, AI to save us, is doomed to fail.
I need to get to one of them. First of all, I'm sending a letter to Facebook today. They better not delete any information as it relates to the Rohingya or investigations about how they proceeded on this, particularly in light of your information or the documents. But aren't we also now talking about advertising fraud? Aren't you selling something to advertisers that's not really what they're getting? We know about this because of the newspaper issues. We're trying to say that journalism that basically has to meet a different standard, a public interest standard, that basically is out there basically proving every day, or they can be sued. These guys are a social media platform that doesn't have to live with that. And then the consequences, they're telling their advertisers that this was a threat. We see it. People are coming back to the local journalism because they're like, we want to be with a trusted brand. We don't want to be in, your website. So I think your finding for the SEC is an interesting one, but I think that we also have to look at what are the other issues here. And one of them is, did they defraud advertisers in telling them this was the advertising content that you were going to be advertising in, when in reality it was something different. It was based on a different model.
We have multiple examples of question and answers for the advertising staff, the sales staff, where advertisers say after the riots last summer, were asked, should we come back to Facebook? Or after the insurrection, like, should we come back to Facebook? And Facebook said in their talking points that they gave to advertisers, we're doing everything in our power to make this safer, or we take down all the hate speech when we find it. But Facebook's own
And that was not true.
That was not true. They get 3 to 5% of hate speech.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Cantwell. And if you want to make your letter available to other members of the committee, I'd be glad to join you myself.
Thank you.
And,
Thank you.
thank you for suggesting it.
Thank you.
Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Haugen, for joining us this week. It's very, very helpful. We're grateful that you're willing to make yourself available. Last week, we had another witness from Facebook, Ms. Davis. She came and she testified before this committee, and she focused on, among other things, the extent to which Facebook targets ads to children, including ads that are either sexually suggestive or geared toward adult-themed products or themes in general. Now, while I appreciated her willingness to be here, I didn't get the clearest answers in response to some of those questions. And so I'm hoping that you can help shed some light on some of those issues related to Facebook's advertising processes here today. As we get into this, I want to first read you a quote that I got from Ms. Davis last week. Here's what she said during her questioning. Quote, "When we do ads to young people, there are only 3 things that an advertiser can target around: age, gender, location. We also prohibit certain ads to young people, including weight loss ads. We don't allow tobacco ads at all, meaning to young people. We don't allow them to children. We don't allow them to minors," close quote. Now, since that exchange happened last week, There are a number of individuals and groups, including a group called the Technology Transparency Project, or TTP, that have indicated that that part of her testimony was inaccurate, that it was false. TTP noted that TTP had conducted an experiment just last month, and their goal was to run a series of ads that would be targeted to children ages 13 to 17, to users in the United States. Now, I want to emphasize that TTP didn't end up running these ads. They stopped them from being distributed to users. But Facebook did, in fact, approve them. And as I understand it, Facebook approved them for an audience of up to 9.1 million users, all of whom were teens. So I brought a few of these to show you today. This is the first one I wanted to showcase. This first one has a colorful graphic encouraging kids to, quote, throw a Skittles party like no other, which, as the graphic indicates, and as the slang jargon also independently suggests, this involves kids getting together randomly to abuse prescription drugs. The second graphic displays an anti-tip. That is, a tip specifically designed to encourage and promote anorexia. And it's on there. Now, the language, the anti-tip itself, independently promotes that. The ad also promotes it, insofar as it was suggesting these are images you ought to look at when you need motivation to be more anorexic, I guess you could say. Now, the third one invites children to find their partner online and to make a love connection. You look lonely, find your partner now to make a love connection. Now look, it'd be an entirely different kettle of fish if this were targeted to an adult audience. It is not. It's targeted to 13 to 17-year-olds. Now, obviously, I don't support, and TDP does not support these messages, particularly when targeted to impressionable children. And again, just to be clear, TDP did not end up pushing the ads out after receiving Facebook's approval. But it did, in fact, receive Facebook's approval. So I think this says something. One could argue that it proves that Facebook is allowing and perhaps facilitating the targeting of harmful adult-themed ads to our nation's children. So could you please explain to me, Ms. Haugen, how these ads with a target audience of 13 to 17-year-old children, how would they possibly be approved by Facebook? And is AI involved in that?
I did not work directly on the ad approval system. What was resonant for me about your testimony is Facebook has a deep focus on scale. So scale is, can we do things very cheaply for a huge number of people, which is part of why they rely on AI so much. It is very possible that none of those ads were seen by a human. And the reality is that we've seen from repeated documents within my disclosures is that Facebook's AI systems only catch a very tiny minority of offending content. And best case scenario, in the case of something like hate speech, at most they will ever get 10 to 20%. In the case of children, that means drug paraphernalia ads like that. It's likely if they rely on computers and not humans, they will also likely never get more than 10 to 20% of those ads.
Understood. Mr. Chairman, I've got one minor follow-up question. It should be easy to answer.
Go ahead.
So, while Facebook may claim that it only targets ads based on age, gender, and location, even though these things seem to counteract that, but let's set that aside for a minute, and that they're not basing ads based on specific interest categories. Does Facebook still collect interest category data on teenagers, even if they aren't at that moment targeting ads at teens based on those interest categories?
I think it's very important to differentiate between what targeting are advertisers allowed to specify and what targeting Facebook may learn for an ad. Let's imagine you had some text on an ad. It would likely extract out features that it thought was relevant for that ad. For example, in the case of something about partying, it would learn partying is a concept. I'm very suspicious that personalized ads are still not being delivered to teenagers on Instagram because the algorithms learn correlations. They learn interactions where your party ad may still go to kids interested in partying because Facebook is almost certainly has a ranking model in the background that it says this person wants more party related content.
Interesting. Thank you. That's very helpful. And what that suggests to me is that while they're saying they're not targeting teens with those ads, the algorithm might do some of that work for them, which might explain why they collect the data, even while claiming that they're not targeting those ads in that way.
I want to weigh in again on this because for time consumption, I'm going to soon kick it off. But it works on the same basis of a pattern that if you have a dog or a cat or a horse, you're a horse lover, or you're a rancher and you have a lot of cows, or a pig raiser and you raise a lot of pigs, or you're a chicken raiser and you raise a lot of chickens, you leave a pattern of the things that you desire and the things that interest you. Because of that, they are automatically going to target you towards making sure that they promote those ads your way. That way, possibly, you'll catch on to a new dog food, let's say blue dog food that you've never heard of, and all of a sudden it comes across your app, and you have a dog that you want to take care of, and there's no amount of money that you're willing not to spend on that animal to make sure that that animal stays firm and complete, and all of a sudden you start becoming a blue dog food customer. Did that ad not pay off by targeting you because they knew that you was a dog handler or you loved animals? Sure it did. Sure it did. And it works in the same type of psychological exchanges as Walmart that has a product, and maybe it's not necessarily a product that they can't sell, but maybe it's a product that somehow or another has come over here from China that now they've got 3 times as much as what they ought to have. And because it is a decent item, and because it is a lower priced item, they'll put that item towards the front. That way, as soon as you walk in, it's glaring at you at the face, and all of a sudden you decide to buy that particular product. These are all techniques, strategies that these advertising agencies use to try to put their product out there so that people will pay attention to it and possibly participate in their product, regardless whether it's dog food, regardless whether it's something to do with losing weight, regardless whether it's a flower or a TV or whatever. They'll do that purposely. Trust me, these people know what they're doing. They know exactly who and why they're targeting the people that they're targeting. The bad thing about Facebook is that they put profit once more over people. And they could care less, or could have in the past. They may change now, I don't know. I hope to God that they do. Towards targeting kids in various subject matters that is detrimental in children's lives, because a child is an undeveloped mind, is an undeveloped brain, and they're more susceptible to falling for these snares or falling for these gimmicks. I'm going to use the word gimmick. They're more susceptible of falling for that gimmick than they would be if they was an adult. I couldn't tell you how many times that I've went into Walmart solely, and once more, I don't mean to be picking on Walmart, but Walmart is your biggest retailer out there. Maybe it's Target, maybe it's Big K or Walmart or whatever. I mean, not Big K, but whoever. I couldn't tell you the amount of times that I went into a store and I purposely had one thing in mind of buying. Let's say it was toilet paper. I'm going to go in there and I'm out of toilet paper. I need to get a thing of toilet paper. Well, while I'm in there, I see something else. I pick it up. While I'm in there, I see something else. I pick it up. Before it's over with, I've got so many items in both my arms that I actually should have got a buggy. But that was not my original intent whenever I went into that store, because my original intent by going in there was only solely to pick up a roll of toilet paper. Now I've got so many items, I should have had a buggy. Why is that? It's because of their advertising techniques that they use towards putting stuff on various aisles, putting various for sale, markdown, discount, clearance, yellow tag. I could go on towards the different types of strategies that they use that catches our eyes, and the next thing you know, we fall for it to hook, line, and sinker, because they have waved the carrot in front of the bunny rabbit, and the bunny rabbit is running towards the carrot. That's one of the reasons why that this country is in the shape that it's in, towards people living above their means. In other words, it wasn't good enough for Joe and Sally to go buy a good used vehicle for, let's say, $12,000 or $13,000, $14,000 and make payments on it for 3 years for $450 until they paid it off. Fairly low miles vehicle, wasn't high miles, clean, good condition, run good, look good. But no, Joe and Sally had to go out and buy them a brand new car, and instead of paying $14,000, they paid $34,000, or they paid $44,000 based upon the automobile. Once more, you got these finance agencies out there. They know exactly what they're doing. They're loaning money to couples that are going to put so much burden upon that couple that they're not going to have enough room to even so much as go down the road and go to a country store somewhere and buy them an RC or a Dr. Pepper. Their lives become miserable. Same way with the housing industry. It ain't good enough for you to live in a $180,000 home. Now you got to go out and buy a $380,000 home. Well, you've expanded your space a little bit. You've went from a 1,400 square foot home to an 1,800 square foot home. So now you've got 400 more square foot house. It's got brick instead of wood. It's got tile instead of something else. It's got better cabinetry. It's got newer appliances in it, or better looking appliances in it. But still, yet no, it's still a house. It's still a place to live in. Just like an automobile that gets you from point A to point B. It's still just an automobile. You may look a little prettier, may drive a little nicer, but it's still going to achieve the same achievements. Why people are doing this is because of the strategies, these marketing schemes that are out there that get people's attention, hook, line, and sinker, regardless whether it's Walmart, regardless whether it's Facebook, regardless whether it's a car salesman that's trying to make his quota for that month, or it's a real estate person trying to buy another vacation home somewhere else, or needs to put his niece's cousin through college that he's made an obligation for, or maybe he's got a bad drug habit, or maybe he's got a bad gambling habit, whatever. But these people are preying on innocent lives every day. And it's literally driving people off the edge. It's driving people to a state of suicide. It's driving people to a state, just like the individual down there in Memphis the other day that lost his substandard paying job of little over minimum wage, and within a matter of hours picked up a gun, went out, shot 13 or 14 people, and killed 2 or 3 of them. There has to be limitations on what these people that's in control of our lives can do, regardless whether it be Facebook, car salesmen, our retail stores or people selling real estate. There's got to be some sort of limitations in how far that they can go towards hooking their customer base just so they themselves will show profits at the end of the month or at the end of the year. Especially whenever it comes to children in safety causing issues. There has to be some sort of governing.
Speak to whether or not that's the intention, but the reality is it's very, very, very difficult to understand these algorithms today. And over and over and over again, we saw these biases the algorithms unintentionally learn. And so, yeah, it's very hard to disentangle out these factors as long as you have engagement-based ranking.
Thank you, Ms. Hagen.
Thank you very much, Senator Lee. Senator Markey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. Thank you, Ms. Hogan. You are a 21st century American hero, warning our country of the danger for young people, for our democracy, and our nation owes you just a huge debt of gratitude for the courage you're showing here today, so thank you. Ms. Hogan, do you agree that Facebook actively seeks to attract children and teens onto its platforms?
And Facebook actively markets to children under the age of 18 to get on Instagram, and definitely targets children as young as 8 to be on in Messenger Kids.
An internal Facebook document from 2020 that you revealed reads, "Why did we care about tweens? They are a valuable but untapped audience." So Facebook only cares about children to the extent that they are of monetary value. Last week, Facebook's global head of safety, Antigone Davis, told me that Facebook does not allow targeting of certain harmful content to teens. Ms. Davis stated, "We don't allow weight loss ads to be shown to people under the age of 18. Yet, a recent study found that Facebook permitted targeting of teens as young as 13 with ads that showed a young woman's thin waist promoting websites that glorify anorexia." Ms. Hogan, based on your time at Facebook, do you think Facebook is telling the truth?
I think Facebook has focused on scale over safety, and it is likely that they are using artificial intelligence to try to identify harmful ads without allowing the public oversight to see what is the actual effectiveness of those safety systems.
You unearthed Facebook's research about its harm to teens. Did you raise this issue with your supervisors?
I did not work directly on anything involving teen mental health. This research was freely available to anyone in the company.
Mr. Davis testified last week, quote, "We don't allow tobacco ads at all. We don't allow them to children either. We don't allow alcohol ads to minors. However, researchers also found that Facebook does allow targeting of teens with ads on vaping." Ms. Haugen, based on your time at Facebook, do you think Facebook is telling the truth?
I do not have context on that issue. I assume that if they are using artificial intelligence to catch those vape ads, unquestionably ads are making its way through.
Okay. So from my perspective, listening to you and your incredibly courageous revelations time and time again, Facebook says one thing and does another. Time and time again, Facebook fails to abide by the commitments that they had made. Time and time again, Facebook lies about what they are doing. Yesterday, Facebook had a platform outage, but for years it has had a principles outage. Its only real principle is profit. Facebook's platforms are not safe for young people. As you said, Facebook is like big tobacco, enticing young kids with that first cigarette, that first social media account designed to hook kids as users for life. Ms. Haugen, whistleblowing shows that Facebook uses harmful features that quantify popularity, push manipulative influencer marketing, amplify harmful content to teens. And last week in this committee, Facebook wouldn't even commit to not using these features on 10-year-olds. Facebook is built on computer codes of misconduct. Senator Blumenthal and I have introduced the Kids Internet Design and Safety Act, the KIDS Act. You've asked us to act as a committee. And Facebook has scores of lobbyists in the city right now coming in right after this hearing to tell us we can't act. And they've been successful for a decade in blocking this committee from acting. So let me ask you a question. The Kids Internet Design and Safety Act, or the KIDS Act, here's what the legislation does. It includes outright bans on children's app features that, one, quantify popularity with likes and follower counts, promotes that two, promotes influencer marketing, and three, that amplifies toxic posts, and that it would prohibit Facebook from using its algorithms to promote toxic posts. Should we pass that legislation?
I strongly encourage reforms that push us towards human scale social media and not computer driven social media. Those amplification harms are caused by computers choosing what's important to us, not our friends and family. And I encourage any system that children are exposed to not use amplification systems.
So you agree that Congress has to enact these special protections for children and teens that stop social media companies from manipulating young users and threatening their well-being, to stop using its algorithm to harm kids. You agree with that?
I do believe Congress must act to protect children.
And children and teens also needed privacy online Bill of Rights. I'm the author of the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act of 1998. But it's only for kids under 13 because the industry stopped me from making it age 16 in 1998 because it was already their business model. But we need to update that law for the 21st century. Tell me if this should pass. One, create an online eraser button so that young users can tell websites to delete the data they've collected about them. Two, give young teens under the age of 16 and their parents control of their information. And three, ban targeted ads to children.
I support all those actions.
Thank you. And finally, I've also introduced the Algorithmic Justice and Online Platform Transparency Act, which would, one, open the hood on Facebook and big tech's algorithms so we know how Facebook is using our data to decide what content we see, and two, ban discriminatory algorithms that harm vulnerable populations online, like showing employment and housing ads to white people, but not to black people in our country. Should Congress pass that bill?
Algorithmic bias issues are a major issue for our democracy. During my time at Pinterest, I became very aware of the challenges of, like I mentioned before, it's difficult for us to understand how these algorithms actually act and perform. Facebook is aware of complaints today by people like African Americans saying that Reels doesn't give African Americans the same distribution as white people. And until we have transparency and our ability to confirm ourselves that Facebook's marketing messages are true, we will not have a system that is compatible with democracy.
So I thank Senator Lee. I agree with you and your line of questions. I wrote Facebook asking them to explain that discrepancy because Facebook, I think, is lying about targeting 13 to 15-year-olds. So here's my message for Mark Zuckerberg. Your time of invading our privacy, promoting toxic content, and preying on children and teens is over. Congress will be taking action. You can work with us or not work with us, but we will not allow your company to harm our children and our families and our democracy any longer. Thank you, Ms. Hogan. We will act.
I'm going to end right there. I don't know how much longer that they're going to talk. I feel pretty confident that they're probably at the end here towards a recess session. But because of time to my viewers, I didn't want this to be too long. But I felt like that it needed to be streamlined. It needed to be looked at for those that are concerned about their children and about their grandchildren in the future, towards how controlling, I'm going to use the word controlling, how possessive that these little instruments now that people hold in their hands, that a lot of people can't walk and chew bubblegum at the same time without one of them staring them in the face, that it has become such of a normal routine for people's lives that if we don't control it now, today, it definitely will be totally out of control another 2 years from now, or 5 years from now, or 10 years from now. A matter of fact, as far as I am concerned, it is already out of control, especially whenever you have people that are having major accidents because they cannot let go of their phone, whenever people are walking into manholes because they cannot take their eyes off of their phone, whenever people are communicating with one another while one kid is on one side of the couch and another kid is on the other side of the couch, due to the fact that they just don't want to talk to each other, but they'll text and they'll communicate that way. So yes, this entity of artificial intelligence has basically hijacked societies in ways that I don't even think the smartest of the smart that worked with IBM, that worked with Xerox, that worked with various people back in the 60s and 70s over in California. I don't think that they had no idea how influential that these little devices that people can hold in their hands, it basically has more technology than the first Apollo that went to the moon, is what I was told. That they had no idea that this was going to have this type of an influence. And you talk about an advertising tool, either for the good or the bad, towards putting your message out there. You can't get anything, I don't think, that's any more predominant other than maybe a human to human talking to each other. But once more, if you don't desire to want to talk to a human because you're afraid that they're going to disperse some sort of maybe spurts of hygiene on you while they're talking, rather than sit and talk, you can text. Good luck to all of us as we end our program by listening to these conversations of these very, very influential entities that are now taking control of our lives. Good luck to all of us as we walk forward in society towards trying to create a more safer, productive, viable society, so that we can all enjoy life and not just a few of us. Thank you and good luck and shalom.